She wore a tailored navy coat, carried a slim leather briefcase, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being exactly where she belonged. Her boarding pass clearly read first class, seat 2A, but the gate agent barely glanced at it before lifting a hand and blocking her path. The young woman smiled politely and said there must be a mistake. Alana felt eyes turning toward her, curiosity mixing with judgment, and she calmly asked for clarification. The agent avoided eye contact and repeated herself, firmer this time, insisting Alana wait with the rest of the economy passengers. A white man in an expensive jacket walked past moments later, flashing his boarding pass without stopping. Alana noticed the inconsistency immediately, her stomach tightening, but she kept her voice measured. She explained again that she had paid for first class and arrived early. The agent sighed, leaned closer, and whispered that she did not want to cause trouble before a holiday flight. That word, trouble, landed heavily. Alana had built a career navigating boardrooms, hostile negotiations, and billion-dollar risks. Yet in that moment she was being reduced to an inconvenience. She stepped back, took a breath, and asked to speak with a supervisor. He suggested Alana might have misunderstood her boarding group, then gestured toward the seating area as if the conversation were over. Passengers nearby pretended not to watch while listening to every word. Alana felt the familiar burn of humiliation, not because she doubted herself, but because she knew exactly what was happening. She reached into her coat, pulled out her phone, and said quietly that she would be making a call. Alana walked a few steps from the gate, her heels clicking against the tile as she dialed a number she rarely needed in public. When the line connected, she spoke calmly, explaining where she was and what had just occurred. Her tone never rose, but her words were precise, chosen with the same care she used when addressing shareholders. Around her, boarding continued, the line shrinking as first class filled. The agent glanced over occasionally, irritation flashing across her face. At the gate, the supervisor's radio crackled. He frowned, listening, then straightened. Another message followed, this one making his jaw tighten. He looked toward Alana, who was still on the phone, nodding as she listened. The agent leaned toward him, whispering urgently, and he shook his head. Boarding paused. Passengers groaned. An announcement came over the speaker asking everyone to remain patient due to an operational delay. The supervisor cleared his throat and addressed her by name, which he had not done before. He apologized for the confusion, explaining that there had been a system error and that her seat was indeed available. Alana asked why the error had only applied to her and not the others who boarded after. The supervisor hesitated, then said now was not the time to discuss details. She replied that the time seemed perfect, considering the flight was now delayed. Within minutes, 2 uniformed airline managers arrived, followed by an airport security officer who stood at a respectful distance. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Passengers whispered, phones subtly raised. One manager introduced herself and thanked Alana for bringing the matter to their attention. She assured her the airline took such concerns seriously. The agent's face flushed as she realized the consequences of her decision. The supervisor avoided looking at anyone. Alana felt no satisfaction, only a steady resolve. She explained that she was the chief executive officer of a logistics firm that managed contracts for several major airlines, including this one. She had not mentioned it earlier because it should not have mattered. Her seat, her ticket, and her dignity were enough. The managers exchanged glances, understanding dawning too late. The security officer received a call, listened, then nodded toward the managers. One of them turned pale. She informed the supervisor that corporate had ordered an immediate halt to boarding and requested statements from all involved staff. The flight would be grounded until further notice. A few nodded quietly at Alana in solidarity. The agent finally looked up, fear replacing irritation, and whispered that she was sorry. Alana met her gaze and said apologies mattered most when behavior changed. Hours later, Alana sat in the quiet of the executive lounge, sipping tea she barely tasted. The airline had offered vouchers, upgrades, and apologies, but she accepted none of it. Her call had not been about revenge or power, it had been about accountability. She reflected on how easily the situation could have ended differently if she had stayed silent, if she had accepted being pushed aside. The thought unsettled her more than the delay. She knew countless others would never have the option to make such a call. The flight was eventually cancelled, rebooked for the next morning with a new crew. News of the incident spread quickly online, sparking debates about bias, privilege, and responsibility. The airline released a statement promising investigation and reform. Alana watched the coverage briefly, then turned off her phone. Before leaving the airport, she wrote a detailed account while everything was fresh, sending it to both the airline's board and her own leadership team as a reminder of why ethics clauses matter. She had exposed a crack that already existed. The terminal lights glowed behind her, indifferent and bright, as travelers hurried past with their own destinations in mind. Alana adjusted her coat and walked toward her car, knowing tomorrow would bring meetings, explanations, and perhaps backlash. She also knew she would do the same thing again, because dignity was not a perk reserved for first class. It was supposed to be standard for everyone. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. Listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. Listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. She reflected quietly on leadership, responsibility, accountability, empathy, patience, listening, change, growth, integrity, fairness, courage, voice, impact, community, trust, progress. Later that evening, as Alana checked into a nearby hotel, the weight of the day finally settled on her shoulders. The room was quiet, almost unnervingly so after the constant noise of the airport. She placed her briefcase on the desk, sat on the edge of the bed, and allowed herself a long breath she had been holding since the gate confrontation began. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from colleagues, board members, and even strangers who had recognized her from the news clips circulating online. She ignored them for the moment, choosing instead to replay the incident in her mind, not with anger, but with analysis. She thought about the gate agent's first reaction, the subtle dismissal, the way authority had been used as a shield rather than a responsibility. Alana had seen that posture before in different forms, in meetings where voices like hers were talked over, in negotiations where assumptions were made before facts were heard. The airport was merely a stage, brightly lit and crowded, where the same dynamics played out more visibly. The next morning, Alana returned to the airport earlier than necessary. She wanted to observe, not as a CEO, but as a passenger. She watched families struggle with strollers, elderly travelers hesitate at security, and employees juggle impatience with professionalism. At the same gate, a different crew prepared for boarding, yet Alana knew systems remembered even when people tried to forget. An airline executive approached her privately, thanking her for her patience and informing her that the employees involved had been placed on leave pending investigation, training protocols were under review, and an external consultant would be brought in. Alana listened, nodding, then asked how the airline planned to measure real change beyond statements. The executive paused, then admitted that was the harder part. Alana suggested listening sessions with passengers and staff, anonymous reporting channels, and clear consequences that were actually enforced. The executive took notes, no longer defensive, only attentive. As boarding began, a young woman standing nearby whispered, "Thank you," to Alana. She explained that she had once been removed from a premium seat despite having valid documentation and had been too intimidated to argue. Alana squeezed her hand briefly, saying she was glad she spoke up now, even quietly. Moments like that, she realized, were the true aftermath of public incidents. Not the headlines, but the permission they gave others to recognize their own worth. On the plane, Alana took her seat in first class without ceremony. There was no applause, no dramatic acknowledgement, just the simple act of sitting where she had always been entitled to sit. As the aircraft taxied, she looked out the window at the terminal, shrinking behind them. She did not feel victorious. She felt resolved. During the flight, she drafted an internal memo to her company, not about the incident itself, but about culture. She wrote about listening before deciding, about questioning assumptions, and about the danger of confusing policy with justice. She encouraged her executives to examine moments where they might unknowingly replicate the same behavior she had faced. The memo was candid, not accusatory, and she knew it would spark difficult conversations. That was the point. She accepted, not out of obligation, but because walking away would have been easier. Change rarely came from ease. As she exited the aircraft, the crew thanked her sincerely. One attendant met her eyes and said she hoped things would be better now. Alana replied that hope needed help, and she intended to give it some. In the days that followed, public interest slowly faded, replaced by the next viral outrage. Airlines updated training modules. Employees shared stories internally. Passengers spoke more openly. None of it was dramatic, but it was movement. Alana measured success not by scale, but by direction. Late one evening, alone in her office, Alana looked at a photo on her desk from years earlier, taken on her first business flight. She remembered how nervous she had been, how small the seat felt, how determined she was to belong in spaces that had not been built with her in mind. She smiled softly, realizing the journey had never really been about seats or status. It had been about standing firm, even when standing alone, and using whatever voice she had to make the path a little clearer for those who followed.